Good afternoon and thanks for joining us. I'm Judy Simpson. A research study at the University of Vermont is exploring childhood obesity. So today we're going to learn about the study and the overall issue of overweight or obese children. Joining me is lead researcher Jennifer Laurent, who is with UVM's College of Nursing and Health Sciences. Jennifer is also a family nurse practitioner and the past president of the Vermont Nurse Practitioner Association. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
This is such a huge topic these days. I mean, it's what everyone's talking about. What's known about how many children in Vermont are overweight or obese?
Vermont actually does really well compared to many of the states. Overall, we rank 7 to 9, depending on what you read and what resource you go to the least obese states, so we do really well. Unfortunately, we still have about 23 to 25% of our children are either overweight or obese.
How did you become interested in child obesity research?
As a nurse practitioner, I take care of children, and what I was finding is that I would have them come in every year for their well child exam, and they were increasingly growing in size, and I really couldn't account for that, so I decided when I was getting my PhD to really look further into that, and that's really kind of what led me to where I am now.
And so what did you find? What are some of the causes of obesity?
Well, I think a lot of people are very aware of what the causes are. Certainly our food environment, we can get food anywhere pretty much. We have food on ourselves most of the time. So that 3 meals a day has become kind of this grazing phenomenon. Kids and adults aren't getting clearly enough exercise. Gym wasn't what it used to be. Technology, video games, computer, we don't have to get up, change the TV station, so we're sedentary. And then I think that the additives that we use in food that we buy really kind of makes us want to eat more.
And what about eating behaviors?
So I initially got interested in eating behaviors working on my PhD, where I interviewed parents and they would describe behaviors such as, and they're obese children, these were parents of obese children, and they described behaviors like selling their goods for food. They talked about going to other kids' houses where they knew, it's the snack house where you can get all the really good foods. They would hoard food. They would eat in the middle of the night. So I started looking into those type of behaviors a little bit more, and that's kind of led me again to where I am.
So now back in the day, healthy babies were, fat babies were considered healthy babies. And roly-poly, oh, what a beautiful fat baby you have, very healthy. And that kind of set people up. I mean, when you're chubby as a baby and chubby as a toddler and chubby as a small child, that kind of sets you up for your future.
It does. And still in a lot of cultures, chubbiness is a sign of wealth, it's a sign of health. And unfortunately, a chubby baby might have been healthy several years ago, but a chubby baby doesn't have all the food and the candy and the sugar that we use, and certainly kids in general are less sedentary and they're not eating as many fruits and vegetables. So it's kind of the mix of all of that together that has made that chubby baby perhaps much more at risk for overweight and obesity as an adolescent, but also as an adult.
And so you talk about eating behaviors and some of the things that you found that sort of resulted in kids being obese, and some of those things are clearly sort of eating behaviors.
Right.
Disorders.
So we do call it disordered eating, but that also has that connotation of anorexia and bulimia, which really what I'm not talking about. So what we have found is that the use of food is changed over time. We eat when we're not hungry, we eat when we're happy, we eat when we're sad, we eat when we're having fun. I mean, so we always are eating. And what happens is that that becomes a learned behavior early on. So food is pretty much part of our lives, which is great, but it also has created a huge problem for us.
Yeah, as far as if you're having a bad day or you're upset about something, I think I'm just going to go get some gummy bears and it'll make everything better.
Right. And so that's
temporarily it's great, but it
is. But what we're teaching children is that if you don't feel good, have some gummy bears. And so that's part of the problem. I think as adults we can say, I feel terrible, do I really want to eat those gummy bears? But if you're teaching kids at a young age that that's the solution to not feeling good, it's actually creating problems in many ways.
And also, too, you talk about what's actually in the food that you don't even know is in there.
Correct. So companies, fast food restaurants, even just your general restaurant, spend a lot of time perfecting taste and sensation and giving you what's called the food experience. So our food isn't kind of what it was many, many years ago, which is, you know, off the farm, fresh vegetables, fresh fruit, and knowing where your food comes from. So we don't have that. And, you know, people are busy. Families don't have a lot of money. McDonald's is cheap. Burger King is cheap. It tastes good.
Yeah, but what's in the bun? You think, okay, it's a bun. It's
right. So when I was reading this book called The End of Overeating, I was amazed at the work that is involved in perfecting the food experience. And what I learned is even the bun at McDonald's has high fructose corn syrup in it.
Really?
Yeah, as an additive to enhance taste, flavor, mouthfeel, all those type of things. So it makes us want to eat that type of thing.
Interesting. So what happens in the brain if you're addicted to food?
To be clear, what I'm looking at is food addiction in children, and obese children particularly, and that's a very small population. I think that the majority of children and adults really don't get enough exercise and don't eat well. But there is a subset of population that I believe that's out there that the thought of food triggers something called a reward pathway. And our reward pathway is in our brain, and when it's triggered, we want to do that. It makes us happy, and then we learn that it makes us happy, and so that it kind of perpetuates that cycle of, I want this, it makes me feel good, so I'm going to go get it. And so it kind of becomes this compulsiveness. And so that's kind of what happens over time with these kids. Well, that's my hypothesis, is that we are actually creating a subset of kids who really just can't stop eating.
Do you think if we were sort of not doing that and just sort of left to our own devices and not having that compulsion, that we would go back to eating just when we're hungry and maybe eating the right things as opposed to linking it with emotions?
I think we link everything with emotions, and that's a really, really tough thing to separate out. So could we go back? Perhaps, but I think that these children who might be food addicted, and it's not a great word, but we all need food.
Right.
So how else do you describe that phenomenon? We need food to live. But I think that what happens in adolescence is their brains are developing. And so those pathways become a little bit more secure, and to undo what's being done makes for a much more difficult intervention or help for these kids who might be struggling.
It's interesting because in adolescence, there's so much emphasis on what you look like.
Right.
So I would think that these kids who are, you know, for want of a better word, food addicted, it would be a double whammy that they crave this, but then they suffer the consequences by being overweight.
It is a double whammy, absolutely. To some extent, their self-esteem does suffer over time. As we all are growing larger, it's actually hard to identify those overweight kids from what we think is normal weight. So I think that in some ways there might be a little bit of a buffer, at least early on, but certainly weight accumulates over time, and so that they will struggle with not only their weight and health issues, because there's significant health issues even in adolescence,
right?
And also in their self-esteem. So it's almost a triple whammy.
And so why are you looking at this in children?
We have, or not we, I should say, there's some researchers, I don't really work with adults, but researchers out of Yale and Ann Arbor, Michigan, and actually New York have kind of looked at this phenomenon in adults. And they really have found that there's a subset of adults that really, when they are given certain foods and they look at their brains in an MRI scanner, that it activates this circuit, this reward pathway. It lights up.
Really?
Yeah. And so what I want to do is look at if that happens in kids, because if it is happening in kids, and there's no reason to think that it can't, then we need to really address this phenomenon early on so that they don't become obese as adults and perhaps morbidly obese as adults.
And do you think that you can tell which kids will go on to do that? I mean, why would some kids have this food addiction and others not?
That's a hard question. Certainly there is family history of addictive behaviors. We know that some kids with impulsivity tend to be more at risk for overweight and obesity. So those two things kind of, are involved in it. And then I'm trying to develop, I'm trying to link, the behavior, the brain, and the metabolism of certain things. So I'm using some questionnaires to interview kids about, and then seeing if those actually correlate with MRI findings in their brain. So if they, on questionnaire, appear to be food addicted, does that translate to looking at their brain under an MRI and actually showing that their reward pathway or their circuitry is activated? So looking at that consistency between the two.
So what are you looking for in people to participate in this with you?
My study right now is a pilot study to kind of get more data out there before we get a larger study. And so I'm looking for about 10 to 16-year-old boys and girls who do have a weight problem. And then what part of the study is having them come in. It's 3 different visits, so we come in and we screen them and make sure that they're safe to participate, obviously. Then I ask them a series of questionnaires, and then after that, we actually give them a high fructose drink, which is probably the equivalent of a Slurpee, which if you know a 7-Eleven, the Slurpees are like this big, and it's all sugar, only it happens to be blue or purple, or and so that they drink that kind of equivalent of sugar, and then we actually put them in an MRI and we see what happens to their brain and what their brain is doing when we give them some tasks to do, and those are kind of like little video games that they do while they're in the scanner. And then the last part is actually drawing their blood and looking at their urine and their breath to see how they metabolize that fructose. There's some thought that obese kids actually have higher levels of blood in their blood after they drink fructose. So are these kids more at risk because they have a higher level in their body, which kind of, that means they are having more activation in their brain.
And so overall then, once you find this information out, what will you do with this information, or what do you hope this information will do for people?
So I do think that there is a subset of kids that we're not helping real well. And I mean, I think I've talked to enough parents as a clinician and also reading and doing the research that, by telling certain kids, you really shouldn't eat that, or or if you exercise more, we're going to be able to help you. And that actually may be a really viable intervention, but we just don't know that yet. So the purpose of this is to really look to see if there's other things that we can do to really help these kids, aside from you need to eat better and you need to exercise more and get off the couch and that type of thing. Right,
which sounds more like nagging, and so it might be helpful to parents too to be able to have sort of a pathway to help out without sounding like they're being parents.
Right, and I think it's frustrating for kids who say, well, I am trying to eat better, but I'm always hungry, or they can't stop, you have a bowl of chips on the table and they just can't stay away from that.
Right, or they'll grab the bag rather than taking a serving.
Exactly. So maybe we need to help some kids a little bit differently. So that's the purpose. And hopefully exercise will be one of those things that we can kind of put in place at a higher intensity and maybe in a different way. And maybe it will help us change our policies over food commercials.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
Vending machines in the school. I mean, Gatorade. If you don't really need Gatorade as a drink or Pepsi as a drink. So I think that if this is the case, there's a lot of different things that we can do from, a parenting level, from a state level, and also from a federal level.
How can parents or kids find out about your study or how to participate?
So I'm at the University of Vermont, and you can certainly go to the College of Nursing and Health Sciences and enter my name, and I'll pop up. But the easiest way is the email address is called Brain Sugar. So I tried to make it really simple.
It's pretty obvious.
Yeah, Brain Sugar. It's about, sugar in your brain. And it's brainsugar@uvm.edu, and they can certainly give me a call at 802-656-3024. And I have a couple studies going, but that would be number 2 that they could press to kind of get through all the, if you want this one, press this, and that type of thing. So,
well, Jennifer, thanks so much for coming and talking about this. This is fascinating research.
Great. Thank you for having me.
That's our program for today. I'm Judy Simpson. I'll see you again on Across the Fence.
For a video copy of today's program, call toll-free 1-888-ATF-3430. Across the Fence is brought to you as a public service by University of Vermont Extension and WCAX-TV.